You can hear me?
I can hear you properly. Yes.
Okay, so let's start. A very good afternoon to all of you, and a very warm welcome to Lata, who has joined us today for this particular event, which is part of the CWDS AKAM, that is Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav series of seminar talks. And today we have with us Dr. Lata Singh. And I'll make a short introduction to Lata before handing it over to her. Dr. Lata Singh is Associate Professor at the Center for Women's Studies in JNU. She has been a recipient of, among others, the UGC Research Award and the British Academy Visiting Fellowship. She has a range of publications, books, as well as journal and book articles. Among her publications are Raising the Curtain, Recasting Women Performers in India, published by Orient Black Swan, Violence and Performing Arts, which was published by the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla, and Theatre in Colonial India, Playhouse of Power, published by Oxford University Press. And she has a range of articles. All of them are very interesting, but I just picked some which are interesting and which are also related to today's theme. One of them is Women in Theatre, Journey from Respectability to Agency in Thinking Gender and Doing Gender, Feminist Scholarship and Practice Today, which is edited by Uma Chakravarti and published by Orient Black Swan. Women performers as subjects in popular theatres, Tamasha and Nautanki, in History and Sociology of India. Yeah, these are the two articles I picked, which I thought were very interesting and related to today's theme on which she's going to talk. And before handing it over to Lata, let me just give the title of her talk, which is Foregrounding Courtesan as Political Subject in Feminist Historiography. So a very warm welcome to you, Lata, again, and it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Seema, and I would like to thank CWDS for giving me this opportunity to share some of my ideas. Seema, this is an area which I'm trying to toy, and some of the thoughts may not be so well developed, but I just thought of sharing it while working on the wives and the courtesans. So I get 40 minutes, Seema? Okay. If one looks at the feminist writings in its initial stage of writing, generally the works focused on the upper caste and middle class women. Gradually, with other resistance, the Dalit feminist movement started unsettling this upper caste hegemonic feminist discourse. But one section of women who still remain largely on the margin in history writing has been those women who did not lead conventional sexual lives or not considered to be respectable mothers or wives. Amongst one such section are the traditional women performing community, and amongst that one section is the Savaya or the courtesans. In today's presentation, I'll be looking at the political role of courtesans and their troubled relationship with the nation in the making. This would also be an attempt to revisit dominant versions of historical truth and relocate the loose subjects of colonial India who were denied political agency and to highlight their political struggles. While there are historical evidences of these women playing significant roles in the politics of the period, but their political voice has been erased in mainstream history writing. Before I begin with their political role, I would first like to briefly situate the courtesans. The courtesans were the traditional performing communities who really excelled in music, dance, and literary tradition. They occupied a very respectable position in society because of their cultural refinement, intellectual, and artistic accomplishment. They were recognized as preservers and performers of high culture of the court of that era. In fact, it was not uncommon for the princes and sons of nobility to be sent to them for instruction in etiquette, the art of conversation, appreciation of Urdu literature. They were valued patrons of poets, scholars, talented musicians, dancers. In fact, they can be considered as amongst the first generation of literate women, well versed in multiple language, writing poetry, epics, autobiography. A few years back, Hindu newspaper carried an article on Mahalaka Bai, the famous courtesan of Hyderabad, saying that she should be considered as the first women poetess of the country. The courtesans got rigorous training in music and dance from famous musicians and ustads of their time. In fact, many of them also got their training from dancing forefathers. They made immense contribution to gramophone cinema industry from its beginning. They were the first generation of women in cinema as singer, composer of music, director, producer of film. Our classical dance like Kathak and Hindustani music owes a lot to them. Ruth Vanita in her work Dancing with the Nation, Courtesans in Bombay Cinema, considers them amongst the first generation of single working professional women. Quotas were run by them as a business enterprise. Historical records give evidence that many of them were wealthy women having property in their name and were in the highest bracket of taxpayers. In fact, this has been brought out in Lena Oldenburg's work, The Making of Colonial Lucknow. But in middle class nationalist discourse of colonial India, the women performers were considered to be the most unsettling figure. They were the most public women whose bodies were available for heterogeneous male gaze. They worked mostly in the night when good women were supposed to be at home. Domesticity could not have been dovetailed with their work. In one of my interviews with one of the famous theatre persons in Calcutta, Chitra Singh, who worked in group theatre, said that how her neighbors looked upon her suspiciously when she used to return late. She said when she used to come back home, they would lift the parda and say, "Oh, Ishigachi." The profession involved traveling with the theatre troupe comprising of men of all castes, communities, and religions, and they had to keep away from home. The mobility, physicality, and intermingling of men and women in the performance space evokes fear of the transgression of the normative sexuality. In fact, in the whole respectable discourse of middle class on performance during colonial period, there is a very fuzzy boundary between women performers and prostitutes. They use a lot of charm interchangeably. They came increasingly, and this was reinforced during the colonial era. They came increasingly under attack in anti-match campaigns, colonial and middle class reformist discourse around women whom they perceived or whom they considered to be prostitutes paved the way for courtesans' moral condemnation, redefining their creative, social, and legal status. The Contagious Disease Act was had brought them under their surveillance and regulation of the colonial law. They were coming under the loose umbrella of prostitutes, and this marked the erosion of their cultural power. Some of the studies have been now foregrounding them as creative subjects. Like Salim Kidwai's work has done, Yatindra Mishra, San Neville, Pallavi Chakravarti, and others. But their political subjectivity still remains invisible. In fact, courtesans commanded not only wealth, honor, and respect, but also considerable political influence. There are references as to how many of them were employed by the state to act as spies for obtaining the enemy's secrets and forging political alliances. They were sent as gifts for kings and overlords by the feudal chiefs. Many of them accompanied the ruler to the battlefield. A. Sharar, in his classic work, Lucknow, the last phase of an Oriental culture, speaks of courtesans without whose help it was not possible to seek audience at the court of Allah. There are more examples from history. Mahalaka Bai was a politically influential woman of the Deccan and a close affiliate in the court of the Nizams of Hyderabad. She was the only woman of that era to be given recognition publicly in Hyderabad state. She was appointed to the highest rank of nobility. She would be present in the court when the Nizam held court and would be frequently consulted by him on policy matters. A battalion of 500 soldiers was reserved to march with her whenever she visited any official. She accompanied the Nizams in war because of her skill, dressed in male attire. She was noted for bow and javelin skill. Because of her contribution, the Nizam awarded her with jagirs on various occasions. One would also like to refer to Begum Samru, who emerged as an important political figure and who began her profession as a courtesan. Begum Samru played a very key role in politics in the power struggle of the 18th and 19th century India. The Mughal ruler Shah Alam acknowledged her as a dynamic woman and his esteemed protector. The military strategists of East India Company considered her crucial to their territorial ambition. Begum Samru acquired tremendous political, military, and economic power, which has been now well documented. Her talents at diplomacy and the political wisdom is also talked about. In fact, one of the historical moments of the political participation of courtesans had been 1857 revolt. But the historiography of 1857 still suffers from the erasure of the common women. Though subaltern studies have made an attempt to explore its popular base, but the common women have still remained invisible, though there are celebrations in literature of figures like Rani Lakshmi Bai. There has been some work on Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh in 1857, but her being a courtesan has been underplayed or invisible lives. And she was one of the important member of the royal harem of Pari, and then she was elevated to the status of Begum. In fact, when Awadh was annexed and Wajid Ali Shah was in British exile in Calcutta, amongst all the Begums, it was Hazrat Mahal who joined hands with the 1857 rebel in providing leadership. Requested by the rebel, she agreed to crown her minor son, Bidris Qadir, and name herself as regent. Under her leadership, the rebels succeeded in seizing the control of Lucknow. However, after a long siege, Lucknow was recaptured by the British, forcing Hazrat Mahal to retreat to Nepal in 1858. She refused to accept any kind of favors and allowances offered during the entire revolt by the British rulers and spent the remaining years of her life in Nepal. Recently, a book of Vidvanshu Mukherjee, A Begum and a Rani, Hazrat Mahal and Lakshmi Bai, looks at her role. One would also like to highlight the role of Azizan in Kanpur, which has been one of the important centers of 1857 revolt. I have written a piece on it. The British, after the revolt, 1 year after the revolt, British instituted an inquiry to find out what exactly had happened in Kanpur. And in many of the depositions collected in the inquiry came out how Azizan would be sitting on horseback in male attire, decorated with medals, armed with a brace of pistols, joining the rebellion, cheering them up. She made one of the gun batteries her headquarters. Even V.D. Savarkar's writings on 1857 mentions Azizan's role in the 1857 revolt. Savarkar's account mentions as to how Azizan, quote, put on a heroic garb with her rosy cheeks and smiling lips. She was there on horseback, fully armed, and the artillery sepoys would forget all their fatigue at the sight of her. As a dancing girl, she was very much loved by the sepoys. How a delightful smile from her beautiful face encouraged writing he wrote, and how a slight frown from her dark eyebrows hastily sent back to the piece covered who had come away, unquote. Savarkar understood that Azizan was not the one, however, quote, who sold her love for money in the ordinary market, but in the field of freedom it was given as a reward for the love of country, unquote. Azizan was particularly close to the Sepoy Shamsuddin Khan of the 2nd Cavalry, who played a very active role in 1857 revolt in Kanpur. Meetings of rebels would take place in his house to work out the plan for the revolt. He visited Azizan frequently. Azizan's house had also been the meeting point of reform. She was known to both Nana Sahib and Azimullah Khan. She is looked upon as one of the key conspirators of the 1857 revolt. Thus, the role of Courtesan like Azizan could not be brushed aside or ignored in colonial or nationalist accounts on 1857, despite the constant stigmatization of them, both in colonial and nationalist discourse. In Kanpur, Azizan's name was alive in people's minds and memory. One of the newspaper reported in Kanpur how people in Kanpur have been demanding that one of the roads be named after Azizan. Although the role of Azizan in the 1857 rebellion is mentioned, there are bound to be many. In fact, the British officials were aware of their places, of the courtesans' places or the courthouse as meeting points and looked upon the such places with suspicion as places of political conspiracy. Their role in rebellion can best be judged from the British anger against them after the revolt. In Lucknow, the British, after suppressing the rebellion of 1857, had turned their anger against the courtesans. There were large-scale appropriation of their property. Ruswa's novel Umrao Jan mentions how Umrao was forced to leave Lucknow during 1857 revolt and her establishment was looted. In the novel, one does not come across her direct participation, but one definitely notices her some sympathy towards the revolt. One also comes across such references in other literary writings. How does one account for the participation of women courtesans in 1857 rebellion? One of the factors was their close association with Nawabs, who were the chief patrons, whose power had been eroded by colonial authority, and their losing the patron of these courts. The British government overlooking their artistic and creative element, equating them with brothels. In the courtesan's view, the British had deliberately muddled the truth about their quota in order to denigrate Nawabi culture and justify annexing the kingdom of Awadh in 1856. But, what I would like to say, just looking at their participation in 1857, merely from the perspective of anger because of their close association with Nawab, who denied them their political subjectivity. This I would like to say from one of my interviews with the Tripurari Sharan of the NSC, who had written and directed a play, Sansantawan Ka Kissa Aziz and Nissa, and done a lot of research on it. To quote from Tripurari's interview, quote, it was not compulsory on the courtesans to participate in the 1857 revolt, even if they were under the Nawabs. Courtesans could have done anything, could have even forsaken and gone, as fighting and dying require courage of the highest order. One does not find any compulsion or pressure on her to participate in the revolt. She is speaking in reference to Azizan. Azizan was not even under any Nawab's protection or patronage. She stayed in Kanpur city and ran the quota, unquote. Hence, one needs to look at the historical context, one needs to bring them in the domain of politics, seeing their participation as political decision. Another point that I would like to highlight is that whenever the courtesan's political role is discussed, their professional role, which marks the beginning of their career, is kept in doubt. or shrouded in mystery, or one gets a bit cursory account of their earlier life, with the main narrative dwelling on their heroic political moment. The middle class discourse finds it difficult to negotiate with their professional life. In the mainstream discourse, the transformation from a professional woman as a courtesan to political figure appears abrupt, unusual, something dramatic. To give one example from narrative on Begum Samru, quote, the meteoric rise of Begum Samru dazzled the contemporaries. Starting out as a prostitute, she ended up as the commander of her own troops, unquote. Besides, surprise is expressed in most of the narratives as to how such women with beauty, physical charm could have possessed organizational skills and leadership qualities. In this context, it is worth quoting one of the narratives on Hazrat Mahal. Quote, before Wajid Ali Shah's marriage, Hazrat Mahal was a dancing girl, and after that she became the most respected Begum. She was so beautiful and attractive that the Nawab would call her Mahakpari. When Wajid Ali Shah, after giving her the status of Mahakpari, allowed her to join the Parikhana, he possibly did not realize that this fairy lady one day would become so intelligent and expert in statecraft and strategies in battle. Unquote. The mainstream discourse looks upon entrance of such women in public space as an exception, assuming that such public women cannot be patriotic, nationalist, or political, or if they are patriotic, believe behind their immoral profession, or would not be indulging in such profession. Sometimes, while discussing their contribution to politics, mainstream narratives like to highlight that these women were of noble blood, came to the profession of courtesan under highly dramatic situations, that is, being forcefully abducted and sold for the profession. The shift from career of courtesans to political domain was not as abrupt as is often made out to be. While discussing these women's role in public space, it would be easier to comprehend if their professional life is kept in mind. This has been highlighted in Salim Kidwai, one of the papers in seminar, The Singing Ladies Find a Voice. There is interconnection between their professional and political roles. Even from whatever little one knows about their life, it becomes clear that in the process of being readied for their profession, the girl children had to undergo a rigorous training. And her training and the skills that she was taught as a young girl, being prepared for a public life among men, stood her in good stead when she had to negotiate with foreign soldiers, with warlords, with aristocrats. Being closely associated with royalty and court, they were aware of the contemporary politics, the law, and being situated in the heart of the city, they were well informed about the history of the city. This comes across a lot in Malika Pukhraj's manual too on Jammu.
Lata, sorry to interrupt you. It's getting
Yeah.
a bit, your voice is sometimes a bit muffled. So I was just wondering if you could speak closer to the mic, if possible.
Okay. Okay. Is this my voice better now?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Huh?
It's just getting muffled sometimes, not all the time, but
Oh,
just thought I'd let you know.
oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
One would also like to add another aspect relating to these courtesans. The mobility of these women was greatly facilitated by virtue of the fact that they had no family responsibilities, not saddled with the chores of domesticity, motherhood, and child rearing. In fact, their lives also becomes vantage point for understanding what marriage and domesticity, the respectability paradigm meant for women. Now, I would like to switch to nationalism. In fact, another very significant moment for their political participation was the national movement, especially the Gandhian non-cooperation movement of 1920s. And this could be seen in Banaras, which was the cultural center of courtesans. Non-cooperation movement in Banaras had gained momentum with Gandhi's visit. A group of courtesans led by Vidyadhari Bai, she was one of the most celebrated Chumbi singer of Banaras, was part of the vast gathering at town hall where Gandhi was addressing the meeting. Gandhi's speech made a great impression upon them, especially Vidyadhari Bai. Whenever a Gandhian procession would cross Dal Mandi, the area where the Sawayat or the courtesans inhabited in Banaras, the courtesans would come out of their kothas and welcome the procession with flowers and arti. Vidyadhari Bai was following with deep interest the unfolding of the non-cooperation movement. She also organized a series of smaller meetings at her house to motivate other courtesans to the cause of non-cooperation movement. She also asked Husna Bal, who was the Chaudhrain of the courtesans in Banaras, to call a meeting of the entire community of courtesans. Husna Bai was one of the oldest and respected courtesans. In fact, she was also addressed as Sarkar in Banaras. Her world was law for the Banaras city's courtesans. It was because of Husna Bai's influential position that the most of the major groups of the courtesans in the city attended the meeting on 8th August afternoon 1921 at her place. In this meeting, Vidyadhari Bhai was dressed in a white khadar, with a rosary around her neck. In the hall of the meeting, on a high table was placed a big, heavy, garlanded photograph of Gandhi. Slogans of Mahatma Gandhi was raised in this meeting at Husnabai's house. It's very interesting. There's a very interesting reference of this meeting in Sabha Divan's book, Sawayat Nama, where she writes how there were when two young girls were present in this meeting, and when they looked at Gandhi's photograph on the table, and quote, they were vaguely disappointed that the hero, that is Gandhiji, who inspired this slogan, should be so frail and old. Was this the Mahatma Ji or Gandhi Baba that everyone spoke about? It had reverence. Girls had somehow imagined him as younger and more muscular. How could he rid India of the Goras? Perhaps he would use the mystical powers. It was rumor. Unquote. Prem Kumar Khanna, who was an Arya Samajist and a Gandhian in Banaras, addressed this meeting at Husnabai. He appealed to them to give up their shameful life. He asked them to stop entertaining men in their courthouse, renounce meat eating and alcohol, cast off their practice of obscene song and dance, and take an oath to lead chaste life in the service of Mother India and Mahatma Ji. After Prem Kumar, Husnabai addressed the meeting where she spoke of the challenge that the courtesans were facing. She urged them to participate actively in the struggle for independence. She exhorted them to wear iron shackles instead of gold ornaments and to learn from the lives of women of Chittorgarh to sacrifice their loves for the country. In this meeting, Vidyadhari Bai sang the national song that she composed and which she sang all over. This song is, I want to just read two lines of this song because this song got picked up by Shubha Mudgal in one of her concerts also. चुन चुन के फूल ले लो अरमान रह न जाए ये हिंद का बगीचा गुलजार रह न जाए. This was a song which called on people to sacrifice all for the country's freedom, and this song made a deep impact. In this meeting, it was said that a Gaika Sangh, a registered association of these singers and dancers, should be formed, and which should promote their social and moral reforms. Members should weed out obscenity in their performance, abstain from consumption of alcohol, use only Swadeshi hand clothing, and sing only patriotic songs. It was announced that a formal public meeting will be passed next day in the evening at Adi Vishveshwara Temple in Banaras on 10th August. It is very interesting to see how this meeting on the 10th of August at Adi Vishveshwara was reported in the press Aaj in the United Province, which was entirely embedded in the prostitute discourse. To quote from the newspaper report about this meeting on 10th, yesterday, quote, yesterday a meeting of prostitutes was held in Adi Vishveshwara Temple. It was decided by Husnabai, a prostitute. She also stressed that the prostitutes needed to reform themselves. Vidyadhari Bai said that they need to stand by the country. The prostitute Moti Bai spoke of the need to forsake singing of obscene songs. She also stressed the need for prostitutes to reform themselves. An organization to work for the upliftment of the prostitutes, the Gaika San, was formed. Unquote. One finds after this banana, a lot of these women started, some of them started taking to spinning. And in fact, Vidyadhari Bai, she has written a letter in Ye Kothewalia, Amrit Lal Nagar's letter is there, where she says how she was impacted by the Gandhi. And on Gandhi's request, Vidyadhari Bai would include nationalist protest songs in her wherever she was invited for her concert, and which was conducted under strict police surveillance of Kotwal police and inspector, but she did not care. Besides Banaras, one also gets reference of Courtesan's participation in non-cooperation movement in Bengal. In Noakhali in Bengal, some of them had taken to spinning. In Barisal, they had got organized and formed an organization, and its aim was to help the poor and nurse the sick, to spread education, promote spinning, weaving, tailoring, promote higher musical training, and join other institutions for satyagraha. Many of them enrolled as Congress members, subscribed to Tilak Swaraj Fund, and they were seeking office in the Congress committee. In Barisal, they had also sought appointment with Gandhi to seek his advice for future welfare. In fact, throughout, Gandhi kept on referring to them as fallen or unfortunate women. And he considered this to be of all evils for which man has made himself responsible. None is so degrading, so shocking, or so brutal as this immoral profession of them. In fact, one, I would like to say that Gandhi did not hold the fallen sisters for the detestable crime. Rather, he considered them to be unfortunate victims and held men accountable for it. He considered these women intelligent and modest. He found their talk in this meeting dignified, their answers clear and straightforward, and their determination as firm as that of any satyagraha. More than 100 had met Gandhi, but out of that, only 11 of them promised to give up their present life and take to spinning and weaving from the following day if they could receive any help. But the others said they would take time to think, for they did not wish, or want to deceive Gandhi. Gandhi asked congresswomen volunteers to work for the rehabilitation of these fallen women. And for him, the khadi and charkha was the best alternative employment. He did not want them to be associated with Congress movement till they had given up their moral profession. For Gandhi, the movement of non-cooperation was nothing till they left their immoral profession. The movement was nothing if it did not purify them and restrain their evil passion, and that none should officiate at the altar of Swaraj who did not approach it with pure hands and pure heart. In fact, he said spinning should not be, done to cover up their shame, or it was like, if they take up spinning before giving up their immoral profession, it is like covering up their shame, or like putting the cart before the horse, or like a passport to vice. He considered them more dangerous than thieves. The thieves steal material possession, but they steal virtues. In fact, a letter was given to Gandhi, referring to the theatre actress in Bengal who came from considered to coming from the loose background. Regarding the theatre actress in Bengal, Gandhi said they should the theatre should not have ill women of ill fame, or women of ill fame should not take to acting or become actresses. And he said the tendency to see virtue in vice and evil in the sacred name of art, he does not agree. And unless they gave up their calling unworthy profession, he should not accept them as Congress members. He urged them to withdraw their names from Congress. However, one gets reference of individual courtesans who became celebrities contributing to freedom struggle. Gandhi had heard about Gohar Jan's popularity across the country, requested her to contribute to Swaraj Fund. Gohar Jan readily agreed and said she would be very glad to assist the Congress in its struggle for freedom, perform a fundraising concert, but only on one condition. She would do this only if Gandhi attended her concert and met her in person. However, Gandhi did not come for this concert, but sent his representative Maulana Shaukat Ali. The organizers in 1921 had collected rupees 24,000 from that one show. When Shaukat Ali met Gohar Jan after the concert to collect the donation amount, he was shocked to find Gohar Jan giving her only 12,000 rupees. Smiling at him, she said, quote, Maulana Sahib, please go and tell your Mahatma that while he speaks of honesty and sincerity, he does not seem to keep his word given to a near wire. Since he chose to absent himself from my concert, despite promising to be present, he has kept up only half his promise. Therefore, I too will give him only half the amount that I originally intended to donate. Unquote. One gets reference of Jagdanbai financially helping the left-wing Progressive Writers Association and a close association. It is also said that Chandrasekhar Azad was shielded by a courtesan when British were looking for him. But despite their contribution to nationalism, there was a growing apprehension amongst the courtesans of that era in 20s and 30s. This was due to the morality drive movement. The fairs were becoming unwelcoming to courtesans. One of the festivals in Banaras was very famous, Gurwa Mangal. And this has been talked a lot in Nana Devi's book also. And this was a festival with the whole night in the boat. The courtesans would be performing, the elites would be sitting on both the sides of the cart. The common people across community and religion would be sitting and listening to the songs the whole night. All these were faced. The temples earlier used to invite them for Navratri. They were also shutting their doors. Now the elite courtesans were now getting only dependent on the aristocrat, the landed aristocrat or the zamindars. But what is very significant in 1920s and 30s, the Kisan Sabha movement was building up in the United Province and Bihar. And one of the anger of the Kisan Sabha and the peasants were not only against the landholders, but anything that represented zamindars' cultural and social practice. So it was looked upon as feudal immorality. So the Kisans were not only attacking the houses and the standing crops of the zamindars, but they were also attacking the houses of the courtesans and they were stopping them mudras. So this so another aspect that I would like to highlight is, how the way the Gandhi was addressing the question around his fallen women and how his followers, the Gandhian followers, were picking it up with their own agenda. I mean, there's a difference because Gandhi was addressing them as fallen women, rehabilitation, whatever. I mean, one will have a problem with all that. But he was not telling them to be eliminated from the city or they should be. जैसे कहते हैं अमृत लाल नागर ने अपनी किताब ये कोठेवालिया में कहा है कि उन्होंने नेस्ता नबूद मतलब इसको खत्म ही कर दो सवाल कोर्टिजन्स को जो social reformers and Gandhian followers were interpreting it in that way. So there was huge picketing was going all around, especially in Amrit. Now the courtesans panic stricken were fleeing away from the quotas and started shutting it down. What is it very significant is that, when the non-cooperation movement and the 1930 civil disobedience movement was happening, when women were participating, the political participation of women increased in the public meetings of the respectable women, uh, how they were looking uneasily upon them. The presence of Courtesan at a Congress session was objected to by respectable lady supporters, and the singer was asked to keep away. Gangubai Hangat also describes being at the receiving end of the hypocrisy of the elite. She said, quote, I remember singing for the Belgaum Congress session attended by Gandhi in 1924. My only paranoia throughout the program was that I would be asked to eat my food separately, unquote. During the civil disobedience movement, in Kanpur in UP, many of these women were stopped from joining the movement and were said, quote, to be unfit to sit near other ladies by members of the district Congress committee. Elite women appearing in public for the first time were terribly afraid of their being confused with Bazaru women and women of loose characters. In fact, the necessity of drawing distinction between the nationalist women and other social groups, such as loose women and the prostitutes, became an integral feature of defining national character, setting cultural boundaries. Thus, despite their contribution to national movement, their place within the freedom struggle was problematic from the very beginning. There was really no reciprocation of support by freedom struggle or the Indian National Congress. The discrimination continued even after independence, and the Home Ministry, under the new Home Minister, gave a strict orders to All India Radio not to permit those women whose public lives were a public scandal to enter their studios. Thank you. I would like to, Seema, I'd like to stop here.
Yes, thank you, Lata. That was really interesting. And we'll have a question and answer session after. Maybe you want to have a glass of water or something, or right away, because I saw that you were having water off and on. So you can take a swig, and we'll have question and answers coordinated by my colleague Bhashwati.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Professor Lata Singh, for this lecture.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, now any question from the participants?
Lata, I had a question. Bhashwati, can I?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Thank you for your talk. I really think that it's really interesting. I was just wondering, and I want to ask you, to what extent do you think was, were the nationalist narratives which you kind of described in the latter half, to what extent were they did they develop independently, or did they have any relation to colonial discourse? And also, I wonder if you think that partition played a role in, the kind of erosion of, the courtesan culture in Awadh. Thank you.
Yeah, Seema, thank you. And in fact, I'll fish up your. What I would like to say, since I didn't want to bring so many elements, but one of the elements of that partition which you talked about is the whole, what was happening by after 1930s, late 30s and 40s also. there was a whole communalization around the music. I mean, that's, it was the, from Hathande and all these people, they started saying कि हमें अपनी कला को बचाना है, जो भी कला, they were linking it up with the, Vedic era and saying कि हमारा, I mean, that's what even Bharatanatyam has done. But even these courtesans said, कि ये इन्होंने हमारे sacred musics and all have been, corrupted under these courtesans, and many of them were identified as Muslims. And this has been also been referred to that, since one of the work I was looking at is how Muslim courtesans, some of the courtesans were getting other. And this has been brought out a lot in Malika Putraj's, on her life, that, she talked in detail कि जम्मू के कोर्ट में किस तरह से अभी तक, she was one of the court singer and a gazetted singer in Hari Singh's court. And suddenly in 30s and 40s, she started getting identified as a Muslim woman, and her identity as an artist got eroded, and how the clips and all were getting formed in the Jammu court. And it is because of this work, and she was scared that something, there's something conspiring against her, and that's why, with a heavy heart, she writes that she had to leave Jammu, because of that reason. And the one comes across this, or this one very powerful novel of Premchand, Seva Sadan, if you read it. Seva Sadan की पूरी debate of the Seva Sadan, which is based on Banaras urbanization and which part of the city who should occupy, the whole locality of Dalmandi and the Tawai's locality entered into a communal conflict between Hindus and Muslims as the othering. So, but what is also significant is, Seema, is despite this communalization, and in fact, in late, common, there was a violence around the cow belt, and religious conflict in UP and all. The areas where these Tawais inhabited, that remained quite, untouched. And their locality, the locality of the courtesans, they were inhabited, and they never compartmentalized their religion. Their daughter may be a Muslim, their son may be Hindu, so this kind of, even during the partition, it is being said that, पूरे दिन Delhi, yes, Delhi was really, really disturbed, and some of them had to run away from Delhi during the partition, but they later returned, and a lot of their properties got there, and then they had to go for litigation. But I mean, in Banaras on the day, 15th August, so वो पूरा national अपना कपड़ा पहना, the way Gandhi was shot, the wives had shut their shutters. So, I mean, that's it becomes a very vantage point. I always say it's become their writings, their life becomes a very vantage point to relook at our composite and to relook at our history from the composite and the secular lens. That's true. Many of them did not run away. They did not run away during the partition. Most of them stayed back in the environment. Yeah, the other thing that you asked, Seema, obviously is the whole, this whole discourse around the good women and the others, and the whole social reform discourse and all. There has a lot of work now being on social reformers. I think many of them have worked all throughout. Obviously, there has been a lot of this. There cannot be, intersection between the colonialist and the nationalists and the social reformers discourse, some of them. In fact, initially it was a colonial, but gradually you will find that, that Brahmo, even Brahmo Samajis and all that, joining hands with the colonial, with the Victorian, with all those moralities. So it is quite interlaced. Both these forms are quite interlaced.
Thank you, Lata. Very interesting.
Any other question?
Lata,
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Indu? अच्छा, हाँ, बोलो इंदु, हाँ, हाँ इंदु, हाँ, हाँ.
Okay. So, I mean, that you were talking about, which to it, one is, if you trace it from the early period, the fact is that the British, if you, because I missed the first few minutes of your presentation, so maybe you spoke about it, but the British were known for establishing in all their cantonments, all the cantonment towns, cantonment townships had a corner set aside in a sense for what would be called prostitutes, because the soldiers had to be kept entertained and happy, etc. And during the World War, they actually organized it very, very, in a very, with a lot of attention. For World War One, I have seen those records. So that was just one aspect that I thought that, because there was this discussion about the colonial state and how they viewed. On the Gandhi point, I was just wondering, you may have read about the Durgabai Deshmukh thing, because Durgabai Deshmukh's first was waiting at the station, I think in Mangalore, or was it where she, when Gandhi got off the train, the Congress workers were taking him into one direction, and Durgabai was a very
Actually, your
young
voice is
girl,
breaking,
literally,
Indu.
at
No,
that
no,
time,
your
went
voice
up.
is breaking, Indu. Uh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
हाँ,
So, Durgabai Deshmukh went up to him and said, "These women want to meet you, and your Congress volunteers are just shooing them away, etc." And then Gandhi responds. But I think you brought out that aspect of the. It's not just an ambiguity. I think it's there about women all through his writing, or more in the context of the wives and courtesans and the prostitute women as who he was. But what I feel is that in subsequent discourse, even though at that time when Swami Shraddhanand is talking about all this, it is not having so much of an impact. But subsequently, for instance, if you see in Delhi, the whole discussion, focus around GB Road, the manner in which it has shaped up, and Shraddhanand played a very big part in it. So on the one hand, Shraddhanand and Satyavati and all are sort of celebrated as political leaders, but they really slotted the whole question of women in this city, for instance, very much in this good woman, bad woman syndrome, and wanted them out in a sense. And this whole criminalization that has happened over the years of a section of women who were, as you showed, equally sort of responding to the political context and the protests and movement. And even very much the BVs and Begums, it's still shuttling between the BVs and the Begums. It's not, even though his earlier work has talked about peasant protest in a big way, but as far as women are concerned, I don't know if it has reached out to include this larger section of women who were very much part of the protests. Sorry, this was
no,
just,
no,
it
no,
was on the spot.
no, no, very good. I mean, I think some you have added because basically, but you have added to what they've given a Delhi's picture, which is quite. In fact, in this was the picture when this पूरा urbanization जो प्रेमचंद का इंदु सेवा सदन वगैरह भी है कि किस तरह से सिटी बिल्डअप हो रहा है, कैसे वो स्पेसेस को डिमार्केट कर रहा है, Kaise? Because earlier, if you look at from the they were inhabiting the chalk, the center of the city, the courtesans, and how once in the whole regeneration, there's a relocation of cities and the one kind of urbanization, and the whole discourse happens. And this has a long history in Banaras. It happened in 60s and 70s. Totally that Dalmandi area. If you go and meet any people, they don't even remember that this is the area where the courtesans and a lot of these musicians, like were inhabiting. This Durgabai, I would like to have a look at it. This is very interesting because what is the thing is, that it has been talked in little details in ये कोठे वालिया अमृत लाल नागर ने इस पॉइंट को क्या है कि क्या गांधी जो जिस तरह से गांधी उनके सवालों को एड्रेस कर रहे थे. One may agree or one may disagree with Gandhi, but Gandhi was trying to make them part of the Satyagraha movement. Chastity, give up your moral imperfectness. But the others were reinterpreting, and the way the other factors in the moralistic drives were adding, how they were reading in between, and the whole Hinduization process, as I said, that is adding that there are trends within the nationalist discourse also. But this is a very, what you spoke about the Britishers, you're right, Hindu, because, there has been Britishers, so even Pran Neville's work, जो बहुत details में उनका सबसे ज़्यादा British के period में उनका काफी documentation हुआ है. He has been saying in many other some writings, he has been saying that when the Britishers arrived, they had the concubines, the BBs, and they had relationships and all that in their parties, in their in the camps. There's a novel, just I'm forgetting. Also, it is being discussed. There were देरेदार जिसको कहते तवाइफ, देरेदार तवाइफ, वो जो मिलिट्री एंड कैंप के साथ वो रहते थे. ये इनका हिस्सा था. Even when the Bengal was going through that whole emergence of the middle class, the Bhadra culture and the Durga Pujas and all that, many of at that time they would bring these women for entertainment. But there is gradually now a shift is happening from 1850s on. You may still find, but the shift, ideological shifts and all have been building up from the East India Company to the Victoria taking as a crown, this ideological, a large number of women from British women have also started arriving. So that kind of a thing, and how you're right. So that shifts, it blends with the other discourses with that time. But what you're very right is that, this, what you're saying is these, there are two works which have highlighted the soldiers also need it. It is, and that is how the whole Contagious Disease Act got passed. If you unko regulate kyun karna hai, along with so-called prostitutes, why should the courtesans be brought under the umbrella? Unko lock hospital mein, they were kept, for surveillance, and because they will be used. They know that the common soldiers will be going to these women, whereas the British, amongst the elite sections of the British, they was not there. And these two work which has highlighted, that Philippa Levin's work, Prostitution, Grace and the Politics, Policing Venereal Disease in the British Empire, and the Stephen Legg's work, Prostitution and the End of Empire, does touch upon these shifts and the whole thing about it. So that is something. But thank you. I would like to know a little more about in the chapter in Delhi and also Durgabai, what you said to me. Thank you.
Ma'am, in this context, I would like to add a point that the Contagious Disease Act, the method of examining a prostitute in Bengal, it was a very difficult, it is not a very, technically it is a good experience. So to get out from British Act, those prostitutes took place in Chandanagar. which is a French colony. And in French colony, they don't have this kind of Contagious Disease Act. So there are some biographies also available, and some of them became Christian. And their biographies is known as an Educated Prostitute's Diary. It is also available. It's an interesting reading, so I thought I must share with you regarding this topic.
Yes, thank you. Actually, that is true because I mean, I remember that Mangal Pandey film, जो कि त्रिपुरारी शरण ने script लिखा था, उसमें पूरा दिखाता है किस तरह से they have their own ways of scuttling the British laws also. They were very intelligent. They were very intelligent women. They knew, and they how to survive in such a adverse situation with the political adversities and all. They had their own lot of mechanisms to subvert many of these.
Any other questions?
If there's nobody else raising a question,
Okay, ma'am, please go ahead.
Yeah, just feel that maybe between 1857 and the later part where you talk of national movement, etc., that shift seems to be undeveloped in your argument.
Yeah,
I would
that's
say
true.
either develop it through dwelling on the context and the
Yes,
changed
yeah,
context between
yeah.
1857 and the late 19th century, or the social discourse, but it seems to there seems to
Yeah,
be a silence or
on that, yeah, I agree. No, Indu, I was thinking aloud today that, if I look at the moment of 1850s and their political participation, the kind of political agency that these women had at that period was really, really very significant, in the war, in diplomacy, like from Begum. How by during the nationalism, the way the whole nationalist discourse, the way the social reform, the colonial discourse had built around the respectable, non-respectable, that whole respectable, non-respectability discourse became very sharper. And in fact, I find, sometimes some of the women in the late medieval era, also more, their political agency and subjectivity. Begum Kamru was someone who was running the court. Begum Azadi was running the court, and in a lot of these holding proclamations in our names were coming across. So that was actually the moment. It is clearly what I find in nationalism is purely they just want to be a party participation, which also got blocked in a big way. They've never emerged as one of the leaders in those movements during nationalism, except when they were called for, to sing national some songs and all for the churches and all that. That's true. That is it. That shift, that there's a shift which I also had it in my mind. That. Yes.
Any other question? So thank you so much, Professor Lata Singh, for your presentation, and thanks participant for being here, and we will meet again in our next AKM webinar, and till then, thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Singh.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lata.
Thank you.